Hello, everyone. My name is Megan Epler Wood, and I led the research on the invisible burden of tourism on Block Island. I'm recording this special presentation using the report in Zoom so that everyone who is interested on Block Island can have a look and see what you think of our results. The report will also be fully available and posted, and I will refer you to that a couple of times so I can keep it crisp and easy to follow, and then you can go to the report and have a look. And then I hope that you will make comment, especially on the report itself. We don't need outside comment or perspective, like an editorial. We need something that you see in the report of interest, or something that you may find is not working in the report that's not clear to you. That would be fantastic. So thank you so much for your participation in this process. I will start by showing you the report, and I'm going to run through it section by section. So Block Island and the Invisible Burden of Tourism is the title of the report, and it was done by three authors for the Tourism Council under the auspices of Epler Wood International and Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. The authors were Nicole Wargo, who was a graduate student at Harvard in the Department of Sustainability, myself, and O'Shannon Burns, who graduated from the same program at Harvard. Both of these young and upcoming women were my former students, and we had the opportunity to do this together with the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, where Dr. Jack Spengler has always been our principal investigator. We did do a similar study once before when I was still working at Harvard. I now work at the business school at Cornell University. But at this time, we did a special test on Jerba Island in Tunisia, and came up with a framework, the Holistic Environmental Accounting Framework for Tourism Destinations, that is a way of measuring the invisible burden of tourism. Now, you may remember that I spoke a year ago for the annual meeting on the invisible burden of tourism and exactly why it exists around the world and how to address it. So now we're looking at the specifics based on a study on Block Island. And the methodology was, of course, the initial keynote speech that I gave with the stakeholder meetings beforehand. We did some additional stakeholder meetings afterwards, and Nicole Wargo also did some additional stakeholder discussion. Then we collected data related to our framework, which I will show you. We located pressure points, and then we identified potential actions to address tourism effects, especially the growth of tourism is generally what we do look at. And then, of course, now I'm presenting to the community. I did present once before to the Tourism and Town Council, and we did record, but I'm re-recording this as that recording did not really work out. So the overview of the data is that Block Island, first of all, is subject to high seasonality with significant increases in use during the summer months when it's at its peak. Now, this creates a certain set of pressures that are very special to tourism destinations, such as in Block Island, water has experienced an 87% increase in usage from winter to summer in 2017, while energy recorded a 159% increase during the same year. In addition to these strains on public utilities, there are sociocultural pressure points that we will look at, including policing and urgent care. And finally, we did look at the question of housing and how that is cross-cutting, as they say. In other words, the lack of affordable housing is affecting a number of important matters on Block Island in order for it to achieve what I would call a steady state kind of sustainability, where constant growth can put extra pressure on, and it has to be dealt with as a cost. So I'll take a look at that for you and summarize as we go along. So first we have the tourism's economic impacts on Block Island. Now, this is a study that's done routinely by the state of Rhode Island through their tourism council. And there's cooperation between all the tourism councils. And we took advantage of an outside report that looks at direct, indirect, and induced economic impacts. Now, this is a standardized methodology that's used around the world. And as you can see, you do see a lot of economic benefit from tourism over the years, and it also brings a great deal of employment. So overall, just as a look at the situation, Block Island has a robust tourism economy that definitely has strong economic impacts. But now our part of the work is to look at something different. Now, induced economic impacts have to do, of course, with incoming revenue from tourists. What has rarely, if ever, been looked at by destinations around the world are the induced costs. It's an interesting problem. We call it the invisible burden because most destinations do not look at the cost per tourist as tourism grows. So that has been the subject of our research. And of course, we undertook it on Block Island, but there were certain issues that we could not address. And the first and foremost was that we could not get ferry numbers. In other words, the number of passengers that you have year in and year out from the different ferries. They are not required under law to give those figures. And previously, other town officials, the Tourism Council, and even the police chief did request this. What Nicole Wargo did find was that she didn't receive any return call upon an initial request for more information. She did not heavily follow up on that. She did go to websites to see if there were statistics available, which there were not. And we made the strategic decision that we would not be able to get that data, so we did not pursue it further. So our methodology, as I said, was to look at stakeholder engagement first. And then we had the focused engagement period where Nicole Wargo followed up with certain experts and the town council members and other infrastructure managers on the island. And then we ultimately decided on these categories, which are called indicators. And these indicators can help you on Block Island from here forward to measure these on a periodic basis in order to understand the changes in your tourism environment. We consider it a way to manage tourism in an efficient way using data to help you understand where your pressure points are. First of all, we looked at energy, we looked at water, we looked at municipal solid waste, and we looked at land management under the environmental category. Under sociocultural, we looked at safety in terms of vehicle collisions, calls for service, urgent care visits. And then ultimately, yes, we looked at the economics of it, but we particularly in our case, because we don't have the per tourist numbers here, we looked at questions of the town budget, tax, and tax allocation. So starting with energy, we found, of course, that Block Island, here's the standard graph, has a great deal of seasonality when it comes to energy usage. And if you look at the different years, you can see it was the same basically between 2017 and 2021, where you see the graph going way up in June, July, and August. And then, of course, we see on the right here a graph that shows that actually tourism energy usage has gone up quite a bit. And one thing we do know that will come up later in the report, as so has hotel tax revenue. So that is an interesting and important thing to understand, that as hotel tax revenue has been going up, so has energy usage. So what we think here is that, in fact, we're seeing, heavier commercial use. Also, of course, there are year-round residents where there used to be fewer of them, but overall, we have quite a substantial rise in the cost of energy on an annual basis per user type. And if you look at the right, what you're going to see in 2021 is that orange bar, that's the commercial average yearly, and the blue is residential. So if you think about it, it does mean, of course, that hotel energy use is going up. And of course, we would want to know how many more visitors you have that's caused that number, which we don't have. Now, one way to address this question and a couple others is to do a study, which I believe the Tourism Council should consider working with. I understand there's quite a few vendors that are available for this, that you could undertake an annual or biannual occupancy rate study. This would be very important for you for a lot of different reasons, since you don't have the visitor numbers. And much of the data that we're looking at relates to commercial use. So the commercial use relates to occupancy rates. So we would recommend, as one recommendation, that the Tourism Council pursues occupancy rate data. Now, but in the meantime, what we know, of course, is that there's a lot of additional energy use. But we also know something really important, which is that the source of energy for Block Island has completely changed. And that source is, of course, the wind turbines, but they do not obviously connect right to the island. They go to the state, but then what is returned is 25% of the total amount of energy that comes in from Rhode Island to Block Island is renewable. Now, that's actually not bad considering the situation of many other destinations. So I would say that looks good. Like, for example, I have the Dominican Republic in my research, and 80% of their commercial use of energy, for example, is from hotels. All right. And the cost to transition over to renewable energy is going to be very high for an island like that. And they haven't started yet. But an excellent study by World Watch Institute showed that, I believe, I don't have it right in front of me, but it was something like 80% or 90% of their energy comes from fossil fuels, from dirty oil, from not that the oil is not as purified or as clean as some other types of oil that they get, and it comes from Venezuela. So overall, the change of energy mixes for destinations like Block Island are very important. And you are very fortunate to have a state that is seeking to meet very high renewable energy rates for the entire state. So you are actually unusually in a very good situation, as good as I've seen, for the actual total consumption of commercial use of regular energy and renewable energy. So you've got the data here. I won't review it in this case because you're not in peril at the moment of skyrocketing greenhouse gas emissions, and you aren't lacking in energy from good sources at the moment. So we'll move on. Now, when it comes to water, just to break it down, it's supplied by two sources, private wells and the Block Island Water Company. And around 90% of the structures on Block Island receive their water from private wells. So actually, most of the data that we're going to be looking at is the commercial data again, not the residential data. But this is helpful because we're looking at the question of tourism and how it's impacting the island. Now, obviously, there's going to be increased residential use as well, which I'll go over. But overall, our data is looking at commercial use. Now, John Brunig is the superintendent of the Burlington Water Company, and the way he describes the structure for your water company is quasi-municipal enterprise fund. The reason we ask is that essentially he does not draw from the general fund or your property tax, for example. It is a fee-based service. All right. And he cannot use community tax to operate. So overall, what we have here is a good utility that is, I think, by every evidence, efficiently managed, but that is hitting a tipping point where it cannot get bigger or capitalize more in order to meet the needs of the growing tourism usage rate. So this is a classic invisible burden problem. So let's take a look. First of all, for a utility like this, you see the very high seasonality again on the left. This is water, metered water flow now for commercial, largely commercial local downtown structures, for example. And then you can see that the water rate is going up. which again, that's just metered flow, millions of gallons per day. It's not going up wildly. So unlike energy, it's not going up quite as quickly, but it does clearly increase a lot on the left there in the middle months. And this makes it very, very hard to manage. If you look at the difference here between winter and summer, the orange being summer, it's difficult to manage a utility with that amount of difference. They have to manage for the high peaks, not the low blue bars. And so that gives a lot of real challenge that may require some changes. Average amount of water consumed per commercial customer, and that's very interesting. On your right, hotel with restaurant is the blue bars for the different years. So we're indicating here that in particular, hotels with restaurants have very high water use. And so as you move forward, one of the things you're going to need to look at is these permits and how those are managed, because overall you have some limitations here. You have the limitation of the water source itself, which needs to recharge, the time it takes to treat water through reverse osmosis, water storage capacity, and the waste stream of water at the sewer company are all under difficult constraints, but it is the storage capacity in particular that's causing the big constraint, especially, I believe, in summer. So there have been multiple requests recently for additional properties, commercial properties that want to have more employee housing or more commercial rooms, and they have been turned down. And the question is it possible to grow while still operating in the black in terms of water with this kind of growth? And the answer really is probably no, unless there is further capitalization of how the water company especially stores its water. But I think a holistic view of how many tourists more, how many more hotels with restaurants, for example, the island expects to have or expects growth within those facilities, the more you have to look at the actual operational reality of that in terms of supplying the water. Okay, so the key issues here are capacity to process, store, and deliver water, managing high seasonality, and approving new water allocation requests. So now on solid waste, we have a similar issue where it's a public-private partnership between the town and Block Island. Recycling management, or BIRM. The waste and recycling that is brought to a transfer station is picked up by a public utility ferry, as we all know, the interstate, up to 5 times a week. They store the waste and they handle it to make sure that the ferry can handle it to take it to Rhode Island. But overall, they are seeing a growth of waste, again, that is making it difficult for them to manage the waste. And this looks at commercial versus residential. And you can see that the issue is commercial, which by and large would be tourism. Now, this could include construction waste. And we discussed this at my previous presentation because it's not broken out yet. And so the actual, what type of waste is found in these bars is not yet reflected. But potentially it could be if there was the wherewithal on behalf of the town to work with the waste facility on not only studying the problem a bit more, but coming up with solutions that might lower that commercial waste problem. Now, needless to say, that could mean, again, some kind of capitalization to enable this very important utility that you have to manage with the right kind of facility that they have to have, which may not be fully paid for by just waste fees. And this is the important part of the public-private solutions that you need to look at, is how to manage your waste. Okay, so what we have here is key issues, which is the site capacity itself for your waste, the ability, how much can you export? It's really limited by the ferry. You could improve recycling, particularly among commercial users, although in the last meeting, it was raised that Rhode Island may not be doing a terrific job on actually doing the recycling either. So it doesn't actually fix the problem because the problem is coming from Rhode Island itself. But one thing that we did find is that Rhode Island focuses primarily on residential incentives to recycle, not commercial. So there's clearly an issue here about how to create a better system for tourism on the island, and that may possibly entail raising the capital budget. Okay, now land management is a very, very different example. Block Island is very well known. As you know, you all should be proud of your environmental record. You have 3 conservancies on the island, and they have done an outstanding job of conserving delicate ecosystems since the 1970s. And they are supported, and this is important. They have a fee system associated with it, which is groundbreaking, and it is the 3% fee on the transfer of real estate property. So this has enabled their work. Now, the question that we ask, therefore, is not how they can pay for conservation, but how they can pay, again, for maintenance of these ecosystems. Just as we've asked, how are they going to pay for maintenance of all of these utilities on Block Island? We see this as your green utility. They essentially are the managers of your green space. And we couldn't get too far to the bottom of this. We did look at trail maintenance volunteer hours, when there was pre-pandemic and during the pandemic. And so we couldn't get perfect data because we had a lot of pre-pandemic volunteers, but not so many during the pandemic. And then therefore the equivalent costs, if you were to hire those people, went down over time, but this is not a good statistic. So we can't draw any real conclusions here for a lack of really good data on what it will take. I think maybe more of a question of projections about what it will take to manage these protected areas in future and how that ties to the tourism economy. So I think that's a really important question and something that a great additional student might want to look at. In addition, we have the indicator related to climate emergencies, and I'm very happy to say that this is great work being done while you're looking already at your coastline and where your vulnerabilities will lie. That's excellent. I'm recording right now during the Florida emergency. I myself have worked on the emergency in Puerto Rico post Maria, where they lost most of their tourism economy and probably are really in danger of losing a lot of their tourism economy again this year. So this kind of flooding that's now happening in Florida as well will leave a terrible scar, especially for places that are highly dependent on tourism. So it's great that your teams are looking at this already and coming up with additional programs, I would say, to be sure that you have a defense strategy in mind that will protect, primarily using natural landscapes. Dunes in particular are going to be very important to maintain so that your roadways, especially Corneck Road, won't become so flooded that people can't move around the island. So we basically have a great situation with a lot of real capacity and leadership on Block Island to manage the natural areas. But the question of maintenance, I think, needs to be looked at, and the cost of maintaining the dunes and also all of your land trust land and how exactly that would transpire, especially with the question of invasives. All right. Okay, so now on the sociocultural indicators, we had the opportunity to meet with the former police chief on the day that later he announced his resignation. That was a really interesting moment. We were on the island, Nicole Wargo and I were together to look at questions of how the police department is managing their staffing and their technology and how they are upgrading all of their systems. And the system change was apparently very large and needed a lot of work in order to computerize records and be sure that there were adequate police on the island because of the cost to put in additional staffing, not as much for paying them as it was to make it affordable for them to live there. So the whole question of affordability starts to become very important, and the police certainly did seek to create a situation where they could have enough police on staff. But the police chief more or less made it clear that he hit a tipping point, that he couldn't achieve what he needed to achieve in his job. And so that's left a question about, say, rowdiness that was again experienced in the summer that caused disruption and even bad public relations for Block Island. Clearly, the police, if they were probably following the protocols originally envisioned, might have been able to contain that more quickly. Whatever, the question is, how can the police maintain the peace? And the question of the medical center is also very important. Nicole Wargo spent a good bit of time talking to Allison Warfel about her concern that they also face a big problem with seasonality. But let me just point out, here's the motor vehicle violations that were found in the data from the police, which do not include warnings. So overall, although we don't have the warning information, the number of violations is low. And then the collisions, yes, those are higher for mopeds, which I know is an area of great concern. There were 66 collisions that were reported in 2021, with 55% of them reporting injuries. So that was for all vehicles, but let's see, 58% of those reported were with mopeds. So there is, though a small number of collisions, the rate of moped involvement is high. Okay, and then for the police also, the staffing question also related to their ability to respond to calls for service. And you can see that they have gone up according to their records. So finally, you can just see also the question of, on the left here, your seasonality for urgent care visits, very high in the summer. And you may have seen a downturn over the last few years, but overall, the concern of your staffing there is that it's the seasonal residents that will always potentially cause a problem. And you see here, the orange is the seasonal residents. And they're coming in, of course, only in the 3-month period, not only, but largely in the 3-month period, therefore putting a lot of extra responsibility on Warfel and her team. And that's the question at hand. How do you pay for the additional cost of managing these temporary visitors? So for sure, there are serious concerns over safety, but they remain a little bit low on data. We could use more, but overall, there's clear warning signals here that from both the police department and the medical center, that they're seeing that they can't staff the way they want to because of the cost to bring staffing out to the island. So that leads us to, of course, affordable housing. This is a big question for for Block Island. We had the Block Island Medical Center, Police Department, Water Company, and hotels all speak to the problem of providing housing to their employees, especially those that are service personnel. The hotels, to a degree, have had a system for years, but the ability to expand that system because of these tipping points being really part of the problem. If you get more and more employees for more and more of these hotels, because you're getting more and more tourists, you're going to hit tipping points with all of these areas that we're talking about. So you really have to look at why that is and what is the problem here. Probably most of you are familiar. The estimated median value of an owner-occupied housing out on Block Island on your right here is much higher than Rhode Island. And therefore, that is causing a problem here of the affordability, where you're seeing the mean income as a percentage of the value. Now you can see when it comes to Rhode Islanders, their mean income pays for 35% of their median home value, while on Block Island, you're seeing a steady state situation here where the mean income is only paying for about 5 to 10% of the value of a home, which is insufficient. So the question of how to manage that on a systemic basis is tricky. And when I spoke to the town council, they seem to want to be spending some more time researching this because overall, the affordability question is not unique to Block Island, and it's not unique to tourism destinations. And the question will be how to manage the affordability without putting other indicators beyond their tipping points. So I think you're familiar with these problems now. So on the economic indicators, what we do see is that the town of New Shoreham receives revenue from 3 tourism-related taxes. We have the hotels, the cottage home rentals, and meals and beverage. Now, a percent of the state hotel tax and 100% of the local taxes go to the town. All of this passes through the state of Rhode Island. So let's take a look at the graphs here. They're very helpful, or the table. So the state hotel tax is at 5% for visitors, and 25% of that goes to the town, or I'm sorry, yes, to the town, and 45% of that goes to the Tourism Council, all right? And the rest stays with Rhode Island. And then for the others, the local hotel tax, cottage, and meals, that all stays with the town. So if you understand that, then it's interesting to look at this. The hotel tax, you can see, has gone up a lot. Now, it's not that the tax has gone up, the revenue has gone up substantially. So this is likely, according to Jessica Willey, the executive director of the Tourism Council, a combination of factors such as more hotel rooms being available, a longer tourism season, and higher charges for hotel rooms. So the overall reality there then is that we're seeing more revenue coming in from tourism, which is an important point. When it comes to cottage revenue, this may not be 100% the complete picture in terms of how much is being reported in. So overall, the question is that the reason it may have gone down is that more folks started using their rental properties themselves, and other reasons for folks to take it off the market because of COVID. So we don't have final figures on this due to the pandemic. Now, on the local meals and beverage, we're seeing a general substantial increase, you can see year to year. So overall, we have these as the totals of the tourism-related tax. You can see the hotel tax went up substantially. The cottage tax, we can't really use the data much yet. Probably 2022 or 2023 will be more accurate. And then the local meals tax is very interesting. And it's also not only recovered, but it's gone above previous levels. So the question really here is, is there a mix here with this tax revenue to consider how to cost some of the invisible burden of tourism that we've talked about? It's called tax reallocation, a way of looking at the total amounts of tax coming in and determining how to use it. Now, this could also include additional taxes for tourists that can be put in place that would be targeted at the problems or the questions of where tourism-related costs are documented in a report like this, so that it justifies, say, financing a larger waste management facility in terms of its capital costs, water facility, things police force, I know, is really hitting a barrier on cost. These are things that if you look at the total cost and how it's managed and how much tourism is related to high seasonal costs, I think that there's a case here for looking at tax review. So overall, the key issues here are there needs to be a bit more review on the tourism revenue versus cost. That's the question of the invisible burden. And then an understanding if revenue from tourism actually covers what we call the operational externality is simply the deficit that tourism may be costing because of its high seasonality. And then if all sources of tourism-related taxes are sufficiently filed and collected, that's another question for the cottage tax. So overall, we think that the financial reporting associated per tourist would be even better. But with because then you can project out how many more tourists you could potentially operate with. You're already hitting a problem with water. You're hitting a problem with waste. So the question would be, how many more tourists can you really accept? But of course, you don't control how many people come on a daily basis. This is something you may want to consider with the Rhode Island legislature. The fact that you cannot control or even know how many tourists are coming is a real limitation for managing tourism sustainably. In addition to that, you can look at your existing revenue, which we have here, from taxes of your residents and those that live on the island. And you can see it's mostly much of what's covering your current services for tourists is actually coming and paid for by your residents. And that's why you're seeing these tipping points. So if you look at here's how it's spent now, which of course the school is always going to be the priority of a community. And so needless to say, your residents want to support your schools, but they may not be, too excited about supporting additional waste infrastructure or water infrastructure for visitors, right? So that's where you have to look at the reality of how to manage that by looking at the taxes and the expenditures and exactly what you need to spend where in order to not allow tourism to overwhelm you as a place. The policing issue alone, it struck us that with the kind of plan that was going to be put in place with some more officers down near the ferry would have been very helpful when it comes to some of these problems with the ferry, the day visitors. So let's just say that the next steps will, really need to be cooperation between town council and tourism council on exactly how to improve not just the commercial aspects of tourism, but the safety, affordable housing, and questions of infrastructure. So here's the final key issues. Distribution of tourism funds in the town budget is what I'm raising in this section. Is there a deficit? We don't know, but it does appear to be the case. And which costs are not covered? We've made a case for that in this report. And the difficulty considering tourism's effect on utilities, which we spend a lot of time on, have everything to do with how to deal with the invisible burden, but they presently now are not part of the town budget. So just to summarize, it's been my pleasure to speak with you by Zoom. We would like your comments. We're going to establish the comment system for you. And please keep your comments to questions or comments on the report. We will not be providing answers. It is a comment system where I and my team will review those comments, and then a summary of those comments will be made. So greatly appreciate it if you want to make any comment on the report. Again, the key areas of the report that we see as the near tipping point is the lack of affordable housing availability, concerns over water capacity and distribution, limits to municipal solid waste storage and export, and costs to manage a sufficiently staffed police force. So I want to thank you again. There's a list of ideas and recommendations that Nicole put together here, and we'd be happy to, if you want to address those, that'd be great. I'll definitely take a look at those. Have a look at the report online. Overall, I want to thank everyone on Block Island that did assist us. Quite a few people undertook interviews, which are listed And we want to thank all of you for participating. And I look forward to your comments. And I would like to say what a pleasure it was for me to do this with my terrific former students, Nicole and O'Shannon. I'm very, very proud of what they did. I personally think Nicole, for a student still in the graduate program, did an outstanding job on this. And it is also my pleasure to do it as a descendant of the Sands family on Block Island, where I have been coming myself now for about 10 years. So thank you so much, and I look forward to hearing from you.